Hello everybody, Realm Builder Guy here, and welcome back to the channel and Crusader Kings 3, and yes, a new Crusader Kings 3 guide, regional guide, start guide, historical guide, but yes, it is a guide. I don't care what people say in the comments, it's a guide. No, I mean, it's not a guide as far as like, mechanics or min-max cheats. What these guides do is give historical background to these fantastic realms and characters that we encounter along the way in our adventures in the world of Crusader Kings 3. Because for me as an historian, history is made by the people, and this is a great game and a great way to highlight some of these really interesting people. And I'm going to tell you one thing, the Eastern Roman Empire, instead of the Byzantine Empire, I go over that in my 867 guide to the ERE, is full of really interesting storylines to get into and some fun possible characters and challenges for you to accept. But before we start here, as always, every like and view and comment is greatly appreciated. Let me know if you have played as any of these interesting characters, what your experiences have been, or if you have not, who you would like to pick up and try your hand with. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like button. Always helps the channel. And if you're new and haven't subscribed yet, which statistically speaking, most of you fall into that category, why don't you consider subscribing? Maybe even hitting that notification bell so to miss out on any future Crusader Kings 3 content or any other content coming to the channel. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive into the Byzantine Empire, or better called the Eastern Roman Empire, in 1066. So we're going to start with the man himself, the Great One, the Emperor, the Vasilevs Konstantinos X Dukas, as you see him on the screen here and in the thumbnail. Now, what I'm going to do here, if you're new to the channel and you haven't really gone through many of my historical start guides, is I give you the history behind these characters, and then some possible strategies, some possible avenues and way to play. Now, as you can see here right away, he's going to start off at war with Alp Arslan. And that's a pretty significant war that they deal with, because Konstantinos was known as one of the most inept, but not the most inept, emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. He was emperor from 1059 to 1067, and he's actually the founder of the official Dukids Dynasty, Dukas here, that stretches in multiple generations, and actually there was a U.S. presidential candidate back in the late 1980s called Dukakis, Michael Dukakis, who is actually from this family. It traces his lineage all the way back here. So he was known mainly for ineptitude, corruption, and territory losses. Under his, magnificent rule, the Byzantines lost territories in Italy. We go over here, you can see there are no more purple patches over here. To the Normans, then they lost a lot of land eventually. All of this would get gobbled up by the Hungarians. And then the Seljuks would eventually come in here under the leadership of one Alp Arslan, with whom you already are at war to begin with. Now, his wife is actually the niece, so this is his wife, Eudokia, who will pop up later here as well. And she is actually the niece of the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church. Now, he rose to power through court intrigue and politics. He was a good political player. He disbanded the 50,000 man strong Armenian militia out here on the east, in the eastern frontier of the empire. And the Armenians will come back in this guide. There are a lot of interesting Armenians all around here that we're going to talk about. Now, part of that was also because Konstantinos wanted to subjugate the Armenians, which he did do, and to break their power. Again, that 50,000 strong Armenian militia was disbanded. Well, Alp Arslan and the Seljuks saw that huge weakness, because 50,000, that's a lot, and they started their attack. Now, he replaced soldiers with mercenaries and let all frontier fortifications fall into disrepair. Now, in 1067, he died of, believe it or not, natural causes of old age. So that's not something that's going to be very typical for any of the emperors that I mention here in today's guide. Now, if we take a look at him, he's got a lot of children, amongst other ones, Michael. I'll get into Prince Michael here in a minute, who's the primary heir. Here is his wife, Eudokia, who also has lands. Actually, believe it or not, she's got a few of these little islands out here. But what would you do if you were Konstantinos? Well, the first thing is you need to strengthen your military by a lot. You've got almost 10,000 soldiers. If we look here, they have 27,000. So you are outnumbered significantly against the Seljuks. So you need to build up that military quickly and build alliances wherever you can. But at the end of the day, he is, probably the least interesting of the characters I'm going to go through. So after Konstantinos dies in 1067, there is a regent period with Eudokia and her next husband, who will feature, but I'm going to wait for that in a little bit. So from 1067 until 1071, there was actually a different emperor, until after the infamous loss to the Seljuk Turks at Manzikert, finally his son, Michael, took over. So Prince Michael, who is in this game right now, he is the Duke, essentially, right here, of Philippopolis. Yeah, there we go. So Michael himself was emperor from 1071 to 1078, so not a very long period. Here in the game, he is 16 years old. He is already married to a Bracationi, but of Georgian, not Armenian. So Martha, her father, is the king of Georgia. So that's kind of an interesting little side. He has a number of claims all around him here, and then, of course, the Byzantine Empire itself. Now, after the Regent period and the Manzikert battle, when Michael ascended to the throne, he's, historians see him as an incompetent delegator. He wasn't really interested in politics or ruling or economics, and he kind of left that to all of his ministers, who turned out to be extremely corrupt. He let the empire completely fall apart and into disrepair. The military mutinied a number of times because, well, he didn't pay them. Now, he lost the final Italian holdings, and he always had to deal with Serbian results right here in the area of Rashka. Now, he was forced to abdicate in 1078 to Nikephoros Botaneitaes, who fought against him with Seljuk support, but he wasn't the only one who rose up. It was another Nikephoros as well, Nikephoros Bryennios, who I will also talk about in a little bit. Now, the one thing about Michael that is of note is the fact that recent studies have come out that he actually, just before abdicating in 1078, he had actually sent emissaries and an embassy to the Chinese Song court and built up relations, or wanted to build up relations, trade relations in particular along the Silk Road, with the Chinese. So just kind of a little bit of side note. So what do you do if you're Michael? If you want to start off as Michael, well, first thing is you have to wait for your dad to die, and then you're going to become emperor. You have all the claims you need. You need to consolidate your power. One of the ways to do it is to start early in eliminating any rivals. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about your siblings. I'm talking about other people within the empire. You've got a pretty decent army, just under 1,100, good amount of levies, and the nice thing is now with the 1.4 update, you also have a lot of men-at-arms to begin with. So, Michael, as you can see here, these are his different attributes and stats. He's not, they even have him here listed as Craven. He's not great, okay? If you want to play as an incompetent heir to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, Michael is your guy. Otherwise, I have a number of other candidates for you to choose from. Next up, we are going to Count Nikephoros of Constanta of the house of Botaneitaes. Again, I am mispronouncing names, and that's just the way it's going to be. Now, he's along the border with the Pechenegs, and this is the Nikephoros who forces Michael to abdicate the throne in 1078. Why? Because he beat a different Nikephoros. There are a lot of Nikephoroses. Nikephoroses? In this story, in this period of the Eastern Roman Empire. But anyway, Nikephoros Nikebota, became emperor in 1078. He was actually a legendary general, and specifically in pushing back the Pechenegs, who consistently and constantly tried to invade Byzantine lands. Now, he pleaded with Michael to strengthen the military, both on the border with the Pechenegs and in Anatolia, against the Seljuk Turks. When that didn't happen, well, that's when he revolted. Ironically, he actually aligned himself with the Seljuks to do that. He crowned himself emperor when he marched into Constantinople and reigned from 1078 to 1081. He faced many revolts, mainly from Nikephoros Bryennios, who I'll talk about in a bit, and a few others internally, and he was forced to abdicate by the famous Alexios Komnenos in 1081. He didn't, he wasn't killed, but he did abdicate. So we have a few forced abdications here in a row. So if you want to play as Count Nikephoros, who is one heck of a military leader, now again, that might change with time. He's got no claims. He only has one title. His primary heir is actually a duchess here. So, you have that to deal with. You have no other kids. You're not married. You're 64 years old. You're overseer. You're a reaver. You're a skilled tactician. He's always loaded up as a pretty strong general, so this could be an interesting one, but it's pretty hard. You've got no claims. You're a good character. You could just try to gobble up all of Moesia and try to press anything that way, but it's going to be difficult playing as Count Nikephoros. But as a historical character, extremely interesting. So maybe, just maybe, a 64-year-old who's unmarried and with no sons is the way you want to go. Now, I had mentioned another Nikephoros, and that is this, Duke Nikephoros Bryennios of this place right here, Kibiriotai. Yeah, we'll go with that. So this Nikephoros was a great military tactician and rival for the throne of the previously mentioned Nikephoros Botaneitaes. So what happened was he actually was listed for assassination by Michael's chief advisor. That, well, when he found that out, that encouraged him to revolt on that side. So two Nikephoros guys, they revolted against Michael for the throne because they thought Michael was inept and incompetent and they had to get rid of him. Now, the other Nikephoros, if you even look at this, geographically from here to Constantinople is a lot quicker than from down here. And he basically just beat him to the punch, as that's really all there is to say. One of the key aspects, not just geographically, he was outmaneuvered by the other Nikephoros, but also politically. He had no political clout, really, within the empire, and as such was easily marginalized. Alexios Komnenos was eventually sent out by Nikephoros Botaneitaes. So again, this is very Greek tragedy, everything here. So anyway, Alexios Komnenos was the leading general of the other Nikephoros when he was emperor. He was sent out to capture this Nikephoros, which he did after the Battle of Calavri, and then this Nikephoros ended up being blinded, which is not the only time that this happens to a few of the characters that you will find in the Eastern Roman Empire. So what will you do if you play as Nikephoros? Well, you've got an okay military. You've got a pretty decent amount of prestige to start off with. You have no claims. You're not married. You're 36, so you can still be married and have children. A sibling of yours, so the Count of Rhodos, is your primary heir. He at least does have a child, but he is unmarried. So the first thing you need to do is you need to find a wife, you need to get married, you need to have kids. Then you need to look at who is around you, who is potentially weak enough that you can take on. Ephesus is one to look at. Kilikia is one to look at, even though you always want to buffer to the Seljuks because the empire is already at war with the Seljuks, so why get any closer to them? Maybe expand into the Aegean Islands or Cyprus as well. So there are a few different directions you could go as Nikephoros. This is the Nikephoros I would choose of the two, just because of his age and the fact that he, could still get married and have kids. Of course, the other one could too, but you got a little bit more time with this guy, and you start as a duke versus a count. Next up is the very famous, and one that I'd already highlighted in an interesting start guide for 1066, and that is Alexios Komnenos, who is the Duke of Boukharion to start in this game. In this game, he is 10 years old. He has a lot of claims on Armagnac, where his father is situated, who I will talk about later on. Now, Alexios, again, he's only 10, but he's pretty good overall already to start with, and he's one of the most famous people in Greek and Byzantine history. Now, he became emperor in 1081 after he forced the abdication of the other Nikephoros that I had just talked about not too long ago, and reigned for quite a long time until the year 1118. He rebuilt the crumbling empire under what is commonly known as the Komnenian Restoration. So he was one of the most competent emperors that the Eastern Roman Empire ever saw. He constantly faced Norman threats and wars coming from Italy and incursions from the Normans from Italy. He also had to deal with, Thracian revolts that happened up in this region that were supported by the Pechenegs. In 1095, he actually appealed to Pope Urban II for help versus the Seljuks. The Seljuks would be a constant thorn in the side of any of these people because just look at them sitting right here and they're already at war with them. Well, that fateful application in 1095 to Pope Urban II, where he really just wanted a few mercenaries, actually that resulted in the First Crusade. So, that's the history behind Alexios. What do you do if you play as Alexios? Who's one of those that I would like to play as, but of course you're 10 years old, you can't get married yet, all of that stuff. So maybe you start as his father and then switch over to him when he's old enough. If you look at the father, the primary heir is Manuel Komnenos. So he is also the primary heir of yours. So maybe you start as 10-year-old Alexios, the future great Komnenos emperor. You've got, again, all of the different titles that you have claims upon, as well as your own. You just have to bide your time. You start off with a pretty sizable military with almost 1,400, a good amount of gold and prestige and piety to boot with. Now, if you look around you, you've got a few around you that are pretty weak that you could take. In fact, you could take most of these pretty early on. Maybe stay away from a Dukas, and maybe instead take a look at these guys in Paphlagonia to start with and expand this way and become very, very powerful very, very quickly, and then eventually overthrow whoever happens to be emperor at that time. Now let's kind of shift through and away from all of these emperors for now and take a look at some of the other interesting characters we find in the Eastern Roman Empire in 1066. One of them is right here. It is Count Theodosios Monomachos, and he is known for a failed coup in 1056. Now, he was not, sentenced to death for that failed coup. Instead, he was put to pasture, so to speak, in Calliopolis, the small little province, as just a count, and he was ridiculed for the rest of his life. In fact, I believe somebody actually named a dog after him to kind of make it stick and hurt a little bit more. So that's really the interesting part of Theodosius. He would be interesting to play, or maybe even his son. You can start as him and your son will take over. And why? You need to rebuild your name. You need to look around you at who you could build your name against. Now, the Byzantine Empire, maybe not off the bat, but the Aegean Islands are there as well as Strymon. So building some good alliances and rebuilding your name and maybe having your son then take over to avenge his father's humiliation could be a fun little storyline. Now we head over here to Epirus, and someone very, very interesting. Not for what they have right now or what they accomplish themselves, but where the story goes with this family. And we're going to talk about Nikephoros of Epirus of the house Palaiologos. And the Palaiologos family was actually very important. Nikephoros founded this dynasty, and it ruled the Eastern Roman Empire as the imperial family from the year 1259 until that fateful day in 1453 when the Ottomans took Constantinople. So this is the house that ruled the Eastern Roman Empire for nearly 200 years until its final demise. Now, Nikephoros himself was a great general. He supported Michael Doukas, but his son Georgios, who is right here and became a great general in his own right, supported the usurper Nikephoros. Then later, this Nikephoros, again, I said there are going to be a lot of Nikephoroses, actually supported the Nikephoros from up here that we talked about earlier, versus Alexios Komnenos in 1081. His son, Georgios, supported Komnenos. He then eventually accepted Alexios and fought against Robert Guiscard and the Normans as they tried to invade Eastern Roman Empire, and at the Battle of Dyrrhachium is right over here, on the 18th of October 1081, he finally fell in battle. So what is so interesting about this one is, well, it's the story that it could become. This would become the ultimate Eastern Roman imperial family in 1259 for the final 200 years that the Byzantines existed until they fell to the Ottoman Turks. So could you recreate that? You started at a pretty good position. You've got a good amount of military here. There are some very strong ones right around you, but also some weak ones. So quick expansion is definitely something you can do. Build up some good alliances, and you should be able to create a very good power base in this area of northern Greece and into Macedonia and Serbia as well. And maybe you can lead the Palaiologos family to the Eastern Roman imperial throne and not lose to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 when the game ends. So that would be the route to go with this family and this character. Now we're going to take a look at two characters of one family, of the Kometopoulos family. We have Count Alusian of Vidin, and then we've got another count right over here in Radomir of Silistra. Now, one thing you'll notice right away about them, they have a number of claims. We're going to look at Alusian first. Now, this house right here, the Kometopoulos, was the last ruling house of Bulgaria from 976 until 1018, until they were finally, conquered by the Byzantines. Now, he is the son of Emperor Ivan Vladislav of Bulgaria. You can see here, Ivan Vladislav listed as king here, but he was an emperor. His grandfather was a duke of Moesia, but his father was the king, the ruler of Bulgaria. Then the other guy over here, click on him real quick, Radomir, he is actually the grandson, so he's not completely direct descent, but he does have a claim, and that is the Kingdom of Bulgaria. Now, this gentleman over here also has the Duchy of Philippopoulos, the Duchy of Moesia, both unpressed, and then the press claim for the Kingdom of Bulgaria. He's got a number of children here as well, who then eventually a press claim will become an unpressed claim for them. So you can start as Count Alusian of Vidin at 56. The unpressed claims are going to be very hard for you to go after, but you could conquer Rashka relatively quickly and become powerful enough to go after it. I personally would find this gentleman over here in Radomir the most interesting because he's 30 years old, he's unmarried. You have a lot you can still do with him because, well, he's 26 years younger, and he has an unpressed claim for the Kingdom of Bulgaria. So you're going to have to act pretty quickly because if he dies and it's unpressed when he dies, it does not get inherited by his children. So that's really up to you. Now, if you would start as Radomir, well, the first thing you need to look at is who is around you and how powerful are they? Maybe go after the future emperor in Nikephoros, as well as the man over here, Ioannis of Mesembria. They have weaker military to begin with than you, and then you can challenge your liege even. If you were to start over here as Lusian, well, of course, you go after the people right around you because you are by far the most powerful vassal within Rashka. Even the Rashkan Duke himself, couldn't get the word out, is not as powerful as you. So the road to independence as a Lusian is a little bit easier and quicker, but the key thing is to go after these unpressed claims then really quickly. So conquer Rashka, become a Duke of Rashka, and then press your claims over here and try to go after them. Then eventually, of course, you get these, then you can form Bulgaria. So that is a really enticing possible start. Now we head down to Ephesus and the Argyros family under the rule of Konstantinos. Now, the Argyros was one of the most prominent family in all of the Eastern Roman Empire from about the middle of the 9th century all the way until the end in 1453 when, they got pushed all the way from their Ephesus home all the way back to Constantinople. Now, he even had an emperor in the Argyros family in Emperor Romanos III. Unfortunately, he's got no title to press. Interesting thing is, his sister down here is the former queen of Georgia. So Ephesus is interesting. You're a little bit weaker, but you've got a few neighbors here that you could challenge fairly quickly. I mean, the Aegean Islands are about the same level as you. If you would play the alliance game pretty quickly. You've got a number of children you can work with. You're 49, you're married. I'm not sure if all of these attributes and stats stay the same, but could be an interesting way to build a nice little empire over here and challenge the emperor eventually that way. You're in a pretty good position. You're in a pretty good defensible position. So Ephesus and the Argyros family, where maybe you can recapture the family's legacy and once again have somebody in your family become Emperor of Eastern Roman Empire. Next, we head to their neighbors and their historical arch-rivals, the House of Skleros, and in the person of Duke Leon of Thrakesion. Now, the Skleros were part of the military aristocracy, which was very prevalent in Eastern Roman society. They are now at the end of their rule as a family, and actually the house kind of goes away within the next 20-30 years historically, from 1066 until about the end of the 11th century. Now, you're in a good position. You've got a number of titles. You're, maybe a decent ruler. He's pretty average. These kind of re-roll, if you were, every single time. You've got nothing pressed, but you're in a pretty decent position with a strong military where maybe you could take over Ephesus relatively quickly without even needing any allies. So Skleros, maybe you can rebuild a former glorious house in the line of a military aristocracy and focus on military and martial skills with his potential heirs. Now, of course, he's 27 years old. He's not married, he has no kids, so you do have a possibility there to make some of your own. Now, I've spoken of Greek tragedies previously, and this is one of the most tragic figures of this time period, and this is Duke Romanos of Anatolikon. As you can see, his wife, who was actually of the Bulgarian house, she died in 1065, so he is widowed, and he has only one child, but who is an heir. Now, he does have a claim internally, but really everything is centered around his home territory. He's a pretty good military leader, but that's really all you can say about him. He's got a strong military to start off with, but why is Romanos Diogenes such a tragic figure? Well, he was also part of the military aristocracy of the Eastern Roman Empire. After the emperor, this guy right up here, Konstantinos, dies, his wife, Eudokia, marries Romanos, who, as you can see, is also widowed himself. And he becomes the emperor from 1068 to 1071. So that is the regent period between Konstantinos and Michael taking over. Now, he wanted to rebuild the military and drive out the Seljuk. Unfortunately, Romanos was the emperor who was defeated and captured at the notorious Battle of Manzikert. Whilst he was a captive, he was overthrown by, well, Michael, and was then blinded by the Dukas family upon his release. So, no love for stepdad there. He eventually then died in a monastery in 1072, so just a year after Manzikert, and shortly after being blinded, he was sent to the monastery where he died. So again, one of the very tragic figures. But you're in a good position. If you would start as Romanos, you can marry again, have some more children. You're only 36 years old. There are a few right around you that are significantly weaker than you to begin with. Militarily, you're one of the most powerful military leaders in all of Anatolia. So that is something I would definitely lean into with him. You know, build an alliance maybe with the Komnenos family, and then take all of these lands to the south and really build up a good southern Anatolian power base. Now we head to his neighbor in Cappadocia. Now in Cappadocia, you can see we have Princess Anush of the Arkruni family. She is apostolic and Armenian. This is very interesting. And why is she called princess? Well, she does have a claim on the principality of Vaspurakan, which is all the way here on the eastern fringes of the empire. And while she is interesting and has a number of children, it's actually her husband who is very interesting. Now, he is just a count, but his name is Prince Gagik, and he is of the Bragationi family. He is apostolic faith and Armenian. And why is he interesting? It's because he is the last Armenian king of the Bagrationis family. He ruled Armenia from 1042 to 1045, so only 3 years. But these were amazing 3-year period. Now, the Bagrationis also ruled Georgia, but as a different branch of the same house. This is the Armenian branch. Now, he was known as the Lion because he crushed and outmaneuvered the Seljuks. Now, he originally ruled all the way over here. Emperor Konstantinos then did not accept him as a vassal. He wanted to become a vassal of the Byzantines, but as a semi-autonomous state. Konstantinos wanted to conquer and annex all of Armenia and actually enlisted the Kurdish rulers of Tvin to be part of this. Now, Gagik defeated the Byzantines and paid off the Kurds, and was then invited to Constantinople to sign a peace treaty. Well, Konstantinos betrayed him and imprisoned him while he was in Constantinople, and in that time, the Byzantine military actually moved into Armenia, which was, of course, leaderless at that time, and conquered it. Now, he was eventually pardoned and exiled to Lycandos. Now, they decided to not martyr him because obviously that would lead to an Armenian revolt. So instead, they just exiled him to this small little county on the frontier where he's still bordering the Seljuks. Now, he always defended the Armenian church, which put him at odds with the local bishop. Now, the local bishop kept on insulting him, called him a heretic, and in fact, actually named his dog Armen to make fun of Armenian. So what did Gagik do? And this is legend, but it's a pretty interesting story. So what Gagik did, he went to the home of the bishop who had that dog with him. He grabbed the dog, threw him in a bag, and beat the dog. Not to death, but beat him to the point where he was just furious and angry. Then he grabbed the bishop, beat him, threw him into the same bag as the dog who was angry at the time, and his own dog then killed the bishop. So that's kind of an interesting story. Now, Gagik himself was then, of course, captured for this, killed, his body mutilated, and cut into multiple pieces in 1079. The years following his death, all of the Bagrationis of the Armenian house died mysteriously. His sons, his grandsons, all were, well, poisoned. So this is an interesting character because, yeah, you start off as a count. You're married to a princess at the, duchy tier realm level, and you have a number of claims. You have Dvin. You also have the Principality of Metzhaik, all the way over here, and you have a press claim on the entire kingdom of Armenia. So, of course, if you die, your children, your eldest they will all inherit this as an unpressed claim. So to me, Prince Gagik is one of the most exciting characters to play in the Byzantine Empire. Now, you could also play as his wife. No problems there. You already have a pretty good claim. But of course, your husband, with that claim, that's one heck of a claim. So it would be really interesting if you take on Cappadocia. You have 1,000 people to start with in the military. Yeah, you got to maybe move south, maybe ally with Romanos, who's more powerful, so you have a good power base, and then take on these guys here in the middle, gobble that up, and build up a good Cappadocian power base before you start pressing some of your claims, or before your children start pressing some of their claims. But Gagik, definitely an interesting one, and that story with the bishop and the dog is just one of those Game of Thrones-esque, medieval stories that you hear about, and that, yeah, it's brutal, but you can kind of hope it's a little bit true, because it's really interesting. Next, we head to Vaspura Khan, all the way on the eastern frontier of the Eastern Roman Empire, to Prince Grigor II of Vaspurian of the house Pahlavi, which was a strong and old Armenian house. He is apostolic and Armenian. What is so interesting about Prince Grigor, historically speaking? Well, he is the Catholicos of the Armenian Church from 1066 to 1105. For those of you that don't know, the Catholicos, that is the head of the Armenian Apostolic Church. That's really the most interesting part of him historically. But he is a really interesting person to play as. I mean, you start with a very strong military, a lot of levies. So you can start by maybe, taking over Mesopotamia, who are relatively weak, or even heading over to Chaldea, who are also relatively weak. So you could build, actually, the Armenian kingdom pretty quickly from Vaspura Khan. But the key thing is you've got Georgia on one side, the Seljuks on another, and then a few smaller realms here as well that you can also keep an eye on, including the Tvin, where you have the Kurdish leader of Tvin, who is married to a Bagrationi, who is of the Armenian house, so who is the sister of the aforementioned Prince Gagik. So just interesting little side note. That could be an interesting one too, but we're talking about the Byzantines. So Prince Grigor would be another interesting character choice. Now we head to his neighbor in Duke Michael of Chaldea of the house Taronites. Now, he has got no press claims. Interesting thing, though, here is he is married to Maria Komnenos, who is the older sister of eventual Emperor Alexios. So, just an interesting little family dynamic there. Now, Michael actually conspired with Romanos' son against Alexios. Romanos' son, what's his name? Nikephoros. So, yeah, like I said, a lot of Nikephoros. For this, he was banished. He was, unlike Romanos' son Nikephoros and a few of the other conspirators who conspired against Alexios, Michael was banished, but he wasn't blinded. Again, blinded is a thing that happened a lot in the Middle Ages. And the reason why is probably because his wife was Alexios' sister. So if you would start as Chaldea, it's a little harder. The first one I'd try to go after is Mesopotamia, so maybe you ally with Armeniac or Vaspura Khan or Cappadocia to take on Mesopotamia. They are the weak ones to go after, and then you can try to take on some of your neighbors. Again, always be aware that you are sharing a border with the Seljuks, with whom the empire is at war at this time. The next key figure in the Eastern Roman Empire in 1066 is none other than Duke Ioannis II of Armeniac, the head of the house of Komnenos, the father to the eventual emperor Alexios. What's interesting about Ioannis, now he is the younger brother of Emperor Isaac I Komnenos. So there was a Komnenos emperor before. He abdicated in 1059, so nobody was killed. Now, what's interesting about this guy is right here, he has a pressed claim for the entirety of the Byzantine Empire. And as I have already mentioned, unpressed claims cannot be passed on. But pressed claims, upon his death, his heirs will inherit, or his children will inherit the pressed claim as an unpressed claim. And therefore, you can have, be it Isakios of Antioch, or Alexios, which would be my choice, who then get an unpressed claim for the entirety of the Byzantine Empire. And that's where Ioannis is so interesting to play as, or one of his children. I mean, you can be Alexios. Once your father dies, you get that unpressed claim. So that would be an interesting start as well. Now, I want to do one final honorary mention, and that is Theodosios of the house Dalasenos. And he is up here in Kerch, or Kerch, in what would be in, let's call it antiquities. This would be the Bosporan Kingdom. This is a really interesting start, albeit exceptionally difficult. Why is it difficult? Well, you have the Ruthenians here, so the Kingdom of Ruthenia to deal with, much more powerful. But then if we scroll out here, you have Cumania right here with their 3,400. Now, you yourself have 678. You can build some alliances. You know, you've got the Alanians here. You've got the Georgians here. You have a few that you could work with, but it's really difficult. But I wanted to mention it because I didn't mention this area in 867. I wanted to mention it in 1066. It's not a start I would recommend because it's really, really difficult given where you start and who you're dealing with right off the bat. But you know, it's one of those outlier areas of the Eastern Roman Empire that I figured I'd at least talk about. So there you have it. That is my guide to the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire as it should be called, in 1066. A lot of interesting characters, interesting strategies, and interesting storylines you could pursue within the Byzantine Empire boundaries. Let me know in the comments if you've played as any of these characters, or if you want to, let me know which one you're going to be playing and keep us updated on how that goes. If you want to keep us updated, there's a link in the description to the Discord. Head over there and go pop into the Crusader Kings 3 chat room and tell us all about your adventures within the Eastern Roman Empire. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this. Subscribe if you're new, so you don't miss out on any Crusader Kings 3 guides or content moving forward. Until next time, I'm Realm Builder Guy, and I will talk to you soon.